My monthly pension was $5,600, and out of that, $4,000 was dedicated every single month to my son Andrew and his little family. It was never something they asked me outright, no. It was something I volunteered with a heart so full of love, so full of hope, it felt like the natural thing to do. Every time I pressed the envelope into Melissa's manicured hands, I imagined Ethan's bright future unfolding like a well-tended garden. I pictured him racing up the steps of a prestigious university, the family gathering proudly to watch him graduate, each of us knowing we had done our part. But that vision, that tender, painstaking dream I held on to for so many years, was shattered on a quiet, golden afternoon that began like any other. It was a Saturday, the kind that San Francisco does best, crisp air laced with salt, sunlight filtering through drifting fog, the sidewalks damp but gleaming underfoot. I remember that day so clearly. I had decided to treat myself to a rare outing, nothing extravagant, a trip to the little farmer's market downtown where the stalls overflowed with late autumn produce. My shoes clicked softly on the wet pavement as I moved between vendors, tucking heirloom tomatoes and fresh sourdough into my canvas bag. The familiar rhythm of the market soothed me. For a while, I allowed myself to forget the loneliness of the big house, to forget the weight of all the months that had blurred into years of sacrifice. And then I heard her. Patricia Carter, Melissa's mother, her voice rang out like a brass bell in the misty air, laughing, loud, unselfconscious. I turned instinctively and saw her standing near a high-end boutique window, surrounded by two of her equally polished friends. Draped on her arm was a Louis Vuitton handbag, its logo glinting unmistakably under the muted light. "Oh, Melissa's got it made," Patricia was saying, her voice rich with pride. "Her mother-in-law hands over $4,000 every month like clockwork. Claims it's for little Ethan's education. Can you imagine? As if they're spending a dime of it on school." She laughed, the sound sharp enough to slice right through me. "Last week," she continued, waving the handbag, "Andrew bought me this little beauty, said it was, 'Thanks for everything.' Bought Melissa some jewelry too. Meanwhile, that poor old woman probably thinks she's funding piano lessons." They all burst into laughter. For a moment, I stood frozen among the bustle of the crowd, the bag of tomatoes slipping from my fingers and splitting open on the damp sidewalk, the red fruit tumbled into the gutter, forgotten. The world tilted slightly, the edges of reality going soft and unfocused. I blinked, trying to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy. Had I heard wrong? Had I misunderstood? But Patricia's next words dispelled any lingering doubt. "And get this," she said between peals of laughter, "little Ethan had to wait after school for almost an hour the other day because Melissa was busy at the spa. Poor kid just sat there like a lost puppy. But hey, beauty treatments don't pay for themselves, right?" The laughter swelled, careless and cruel. I turned away, the voices trailing behind me like knives pressed against my skin. I walked back to my car in a daze. I don't even remember how I drove home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting alone in the kitchen, the cold afternoon light slanting across the floor, painting long, golden lines that seemed to mock the emptiness inside me. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, the kettle whistling itself hoarse on the stove before I remembered to shut it off. Everything I had believed, every justification I had clung to over the years, crumbled around me like dry leaves in the wind. I had sacrificed so much, tightened my own belt so that Andrew and Melissa could breathe a little easier, skipped vacations, skimped on heating during the winter, foregone new clothes when my old ones frayed and wore thin. And for what? So that Melissa could flaunt designer handbags and expensive facials? So that Ethan, my sweet boy, could be left abandoned at school? Number no more. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the wind batter against the old windows, and made a vow to myself. I would no longer be a silent victim. I would reclaim my life, piece by painful piece. That sleepless night became the first of many. The old house, once filled with the sounds of a growing family, now seemed cavernous and hollow. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind, every ticking second on the clock seemed to echo the question pounding relentlessly in my mind. How could I have been so blind? I sat in my armchair by the front window, wrapped in an old knitted shawl that my mother had made for me decades ago. The shawl smelled faintly of lavender and memories, and as I clutched it around my shoulders, I stared out into the darkness beyond the glass. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Across the way, the neighbor's porch light flickered as moths danced desperately against it. Life continued, indifferent to my heartache. I knew I couldn't confront Melissa and Andrew without evidence. They would deny, manipulate, perhaps even twist the story so that I seemed petty or senile. No, this war would be fought with careful steps and an iron will. The next morning, while the household stirred lazily awake, I moved through the kitchen, methodically wiping down counters and brewing coffee, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I smiled when Melissa wandered in, bleary-eyed, her silk robe tied carelessly around her waist, a faint perfume of luxury clinging to her. "Good morning, Eleanor," she chirped, her voice syrupy sweet. "Morning, dear," I replied smoothly, pouring her a cup without letting my hand tremble. We exchanged meaningless pleasantries, but behind my gentle smile, I studied her. Every glance at her phone, every smug little smirk when she received a message, every flashy package that arrived at our door, signed for with barely concealed glee. I began keeping a notebook, hidden deep within the locked drawer of my old writing desk. Every purchase, every new item that crossed the threshold, every whispered conversation I overheard, I recorded meticulously. Melissa was sloppy because she believed herself untouchable. She thought of me as harmless, a doddering old woman too set in her ways to see the truth staring her in the face. But she was wrong. One Thursday afternoon, I feigned a headache and stayed behind while Melissa and Andrew took Ethan to his swimming lesson. As soon as the house was quiet, I slipped into their room. It felt wrong, intrusive, but the memory of Ethan's sad, waiting face steeled me. In the closet, I found bag after bag from designer stores, shoes that could pay for 3 months of groceries, dresses with tags still swinging from their seams, jewelry boxes tucked away under the bed. In the nightstand drawer, I found credit card statements, bills that showed weekend retreats, luxury spa days, lavish dinners at restaurants I had only seen in glossy magazines, and worst of all, tucked between the glossy bills, a photograph. Melissa, dressed to the nines, smiling intimately at a man much younger than Andrew, a man whose hands rested far too familiarly on her waist. I sank onto the bed, my hands trembling. The betrayal was complete. I returned everything carefully to its place. When the family came home, I was back at the kitchen table, working on a crossword puzzle, my face serene, my heart burning with cold fury. Over the next several weeks, I built my case. I asked my old friend, Margaret Bennett, for help. Margaret, bless her soul, had been a journalist before she retired, and she still had the instincts of a bloodhound. Together, we documented everything. Receipts from Melissa's lavish spending sprees, photographs of her at the gym, flirting shamelessly with her young trainer, school records showing multiple instances of Ethan being left alone after class, bank records proving the monthly siphoning of my pension. Margaret even helped me install a discreet little camera in the living room, nothing fancy, just enough to catch the casual way Melissa spoke about me when she thought I wasn't listening. The things she said. "She's so old-fashioned, she probably thinks this house still costs $500 a month to run," Melissa laughed one evening to a friend over the phone. "Let her pay for everything. She's lucky we let her stay." The words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. I contacted Deborah Collins, a retired attorney who had helped several women in our community fight against exploitation and abuse. After a long, tearful conversation over tea, Deborah took my hand firmly in hers and said, "Eleanor, it's time you stopped sacrificing yourself for people who don't deserve it." She promised to guide me through the legal process. Quietly, carefully, we prepared, and all the while I maintained my facade, smiling at family dinners, helping Ethan with his homework, listening patiently as Melissa whined about the stress of being a full-time mother while shopping online for another designer purse. I became a ghost in my own life, silent, invisible, but watching everything. The day of reckoning would come, I knew, but until then, I would wait. I would endure. I would gather every shard of truth until it formed a sword strong enough to cut through every lie. Because if life had taught me anything, it was that sometimes the kindest heart must wield the sharpest blade, and for the sake of my grandson, for the sake of my dignity, I was prepared to fight, even if it cost me everything. Weeks turned into months, but I remained patient. Every morning, I moved through the house like a caretaker, polishing the relics of a crumbling empire. I packed Ethan's lunch boxes, laundered the sheets Melissa tossed haphazardly onto the floor, watered the wilting plants on the windowsills. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but inwardly, I was a woman transformed. Each receipt tucked into my growing evidence folder was a small victory. Each whispered insult recorded by Margaret's devices was a brick laid firmly in the walls of my quiet, methodical rebellion. Melissa remained oblivious, smug in her belief that her little empire of lies was unassailable. She strutted through the house in new dresses, dripped new jewelry from her ears and wrists, waved her manicured hands dismissively when Andrew came home late from work, exhausted and hollow-eyed. I watched it all. I watched my son shrink day by day into a shadow of the bright, kind boy I had once raised. And that was the final betrayal. Because I could forgive the waste. I could even forgive the lies about the money, but I could not, would not, forgive the way Melissa poisoned everything she touched, including Andrew's spirit. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the final piece of my plan fell into place. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a battered photo album, when Andrew stumbled in the door. His shoulders were hunched under the weight of another brutal workday. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door with a metallic clatter, rubbed his temples, and collapsed into the chair opposite mine. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "Tough day?" I asked gently. He nodded. "Tough month. Tough year." There was a heaviness in his voice that broke my heart anew. I closed the photo album, smoothing my hands over its worn leather cover. "Andrew," I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Do you ever feel trapped? Like no matter how much you give, it's never enough?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Every single day." I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his fingers, the physical proof of a man working himself to the bone for a dream that wasn't even his own. "You deserve better, son," I said softly. "Ethan deserves better." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. His silence spoke volumes. That night, I finalized everything with Deborah. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, photographs, school reports, voice recordings, witness testimony. Deborah prepared a formal motion to assert my full legal ownership of the house, citing financial exploitation of a senior citizen, a serious offense under California law. We also prepared a custody support letter on behalf of Andrew, documenting the neglect Ethan had suffered under Melissa's so-called care. I even wrote my own personal statement, pages and pages of memories, sacrifices, sleepless nights. I poured my heart onto those pages, my hands trembling as I bared the truth that had lived buried inside me for so long. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival. It was about dignity. It was about love. The final confrontation was set for Ethan's birthday party. There was a certain poetry to it, a celebration of new beginnings on the very day that once symbolized hope and innocence. I spent days preparing. I baked Ethan's favorite chocolate cake from scratch, filling the house with the warm, rich smell of cocoa and vanilla. I hung simple decorations in the dining room, paper streamers and balloons that bobbed gently in the breeze from the open windows. I set the good china on the table, the set my mother had given me on my wedding day, a reminder that some gifts are meant to last forever. Melissa, of course, spent the morning at the salon, returning just an hour before guests arrived, her hair freshly styled, her nails gleaming. "You really went all out, Eleanor," she said with a smirk, surveying the modest decorations. "Trying to make up for all the years you didn't bother." I smiled sweetly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Just trying to make it a day Ethan will always remember," I said. And he would, just not for the reasons Melissa thought. The guests arrived, Patricia and Frank, a few of Melissa's loud, flashy friends, a handful of neighbors who had seen too much and understood too little. Margaret and Deborah were there too, blending seamlessly into the crowd, their smiles warm, but their eyes sharp. We sang "Happy Birthday" around the table. Ethan beamed, his little face glowing in the candlelight. My heart ached with love and pride. When he blew out his candles, everyone clapped, laughed, reached for their wine glasses. That was when I stood. I cleared my throat softly, tapping my glass with a fork. "Before we enjoy the cake," I said, "I have something to share." Melissa's smile faltered. Patricia leaned forward, sensing trouble. Andrew straightened in his seat, his brow furrowed. I pulled out the thick manila envelope from beneath the tablecloth and laid it gently on the table. "This," I said, "is the truth." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels almost physical, like a heavy fog settling over everyone, making every breath thick and slow. Melissa shifted in her chair, laughing nervously. "Eleanor, what's this all about? Come on, it's Ethan's birthday. Let's not make it weird." I ignored her, my hand steady as I pulled the documents from the envelope. I laid them out, carefully, methodically, each piece of evidence like a carefully placed stone in a path that only led in one direction, toward the truth. I spoke slowly, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of years of suppressed pain. "Over the past 5 years," I began, "I have contributed over $240,000 to this household under the belief that it was going toward Ethan's education and well-being." There were gasps from the few neighbors who hadn't already drifted away from our family gossip. Melissa opened her mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing her before she could spew another lie. "I trusted you," I continued. "I tightened my own belt. I went without. I scraped and saved so that Ethan could have a better future. But instead, I spread out the photographs Margaret had captured. Melissa wrapped in the arms of her young gym trainer. Melissa laughing over martinis with girlfriends. The receipt for the $400 bottle of wine still attached to the image. Melissa sprawled across a sun lounger at a luxury spa while Ethan sat alone at school waiting for someone, anyone, to pick him up. Andrew stood up so quickly His chair scraped harshly against the floor. His face went from confusion to horror to betrayal in the span of a few seconds. Melissa jumped to her feet, reaching for the photographs. "This is insane!" she shrieked. "You're spying on me! This is illegal!" Patricia barked a bitter laugh from the far side of the table. "You're really going to ruin your own grandson's birthday with your crazy conspiracy theories? Eleanor!" I turned to Patricia, my eyes steady, my voice colder than the winter wind. "You allowed your daughter to exploit me. You encouraged her to squander money meant for Ethan's future on handbags and vacations. And worse, you taught her to abandon her own child for vanity." Patricia's face flushed a deep, angry red. She opened her mouth to retort, but I wasn't finished. I turned back to Melissa, who was now trembling with fury. "I have recordings," I said, "of you mocking me, of you bragging about how easy it was to manipulate me, of you planning how to siphon more from me without lifting a finger." Deborah stepped forward from her quiet corner of the room, setting down a neat stack of legal documents. "And these," she said in her firm, clear voice, "are the papers asserting Eleanor Hayes' full ownership of this home, freezing all access to her accounts and beginning the proceedings for financial restitution." Andrew turned to Melissa, his face white, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might shatter his own teeth. "Is it true?" he asked, voice shaking. Melissa's eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an ally, for a lifeline, finding none. "Andrew, please," she sobbed, lunging toward him. "You know how hard it's been. You know how stressful things are." Andrew stepped back, the movement small but devastating. "No," he said quietly. "No more excuses." And with those simple words, something monumental shifted. The walls Melissa had built with lies and charm began to crumble. Patricia rose from her chair, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You think you've won? You're nothing but a bitter old woman, alone and miserable." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't clinging to some illusion of family built on my own sacrifices and their endless greed. I was standing tall, free. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. Melissa moved out first, dragging her suitcases across the front lawn, screeching insults over her shoulder while the neighbors peered from behind their curtains. She filed motions, appeals, desperate to claw back some shred of control. But the evidence was overwhelming. Deborah saw to that. Patricia tried to stir up the neighborhood against me, whispering lies about elder abuse and manipulation, but the truth had a way of seeping out, slow and unstoppable as spring thaw. Neighbors who once smiled politely but kept their distance now stopped by to offer their support. Handwritten notes tucked into my mailbox, fresh pies left on my doorstep, simple acts of kindness that stitched the torn edges of my heart back together, one careful thread at a time. Andrew filed for divorce, citing abandonment, infidelity, and financial misconduct. He fought for and won full custody of Ethan. It wasn't easy, it wasn't painless, but it was necessary. There were moments late at night when the house felt too quiet, when the echoes of Ethan's laughter down the hall seemed like distant ghosts, when the grief of what I had lost, the family I had hoped for, the years I had spent trying to hold it all together, wrapped around me like a cold, heavy blanket. But there were also new moments. Moments of peace, sitting with Ethan at the kitchen table, helping him with his homework, his small hand clutching mine, walking through the farmer's market, teaching him the difference between a good tomato and a great one, reading bedtime stories, our voices blending together under the soft yellow glow of the lamp. Moments when I realized that family isn't about blood or obligation or the painful contortions we perform to keep appearances intact. Family is about showing up day after day, heartbreak after heartbreak, choosing love, choosing protection, choosing honesty. One chilly evening, as we sat wrapped in blankets on the porch swing, Ethan looked up at me with those wide, honest eyes. "Grandma," he said softly, "are you happy now?" I swallowed hard, blinking back sudden tears. I thought of all the sacrifices, all the betrayals, all the nights I had spent questioning my own worth, and then I thought of this moment, of Ethan's hand in mine, of the soft hum of the crickets, of the future still unwritten and full of hope. I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, "I'm finally home." To those of you listening who have given and given until you feel hollow, to those who have loved family who could not or would not love you back, to those who think it's too late to reclaim your dignity, your peace, your joy, hear me. It is never too late. You are not alone. You are worthy of more than the scraps others throw at your feet. You deserve a life that feels good in your own heart, not just on the surface. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about your strength, your battles, your victories, and if this story touched you, if it made you feel even a little less alone. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience, hope, and the quiet, unstoppable power of choosing yourself. And because sometimes the greatest love story is the one we write with our own two hands. The months after the court hearings settled into a new kind of rhythm. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy fog had finally lifted. Gone were the bitter arguments, the slammed doors, the anxious silences thick enough to choke on. What remained was something simple and precious: peace. Andrew stayed for a few weeks after Melissa moved out, at first because he had nowhere else to go, and then, slowly, because he realized he didn't want to leave. There were evenings when I would find him sitting on the porch with Ethan, the two of them laughing over a worn deck of playing cards, the weight that had bent his shoulders for so long finally beginning to ease. For the first time in years, Andrew started to come back to himself. He began cooking dinner once a week, an awkward but endearing endeavor that often resulted in burnt casseroles and undercooked pasta. He took Ethan to the park every Saturday, pushing him on the swing so high that the boys' shrieks of laughter echoed across the fields. And late at night, when the house was quiet except for the creak of the old floorboards settling, he would sit with me at the kitchen table, sipping tea and talking, really talking, in a way he hadn't since he was a boy. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said one night, his voice rough with guilt. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We both lost ourselves for a while," I said softly, "but we found our way back. That's what matters." He nodded, blinking rapidly, and I saw the boy he had been, the boy who used to bring me dandelions he picked from the cracks in the sidewalk, beaming with pride at his simple gift. We were healing, piece by fragile piece. Ethan thrived in this new world of honesty and love. He became more outgoing, more confident. His grades improved, and he made new friends. He took to gardening with me in the backyard, his small hands digging eagerly into the rich soil as we planted tomatoes, carrots, and marigolds. Every evening, we would sit side by side, our hands dirty, our hearts full, watching the sun dip below the rooftops in a blaze of pink and gold. "Grandma," he said one evening, holding up a tiny sprig of green, "this one's mine. I'm going to grow the biggest carrot ever." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "I bet you will, sweetheart." Life had slowed to a gentler, sweeter pace, but peace, I learned, isn't the absence of struggle. It's the courage to face new challenges without fear. And there were challenges ahead. My health, once robust, began to falter. It started small, a twinge in my back, a persistent cough, days when the stairs seemed steeper than they used to be. I brushed it off at first, too busy enjoying the freedom of our reclaimed lives to pay much attention. But during a routine checkup, my doctor frowned as he listened to my breathing. Tests were ordered. Blood was drawn. Machines hummed and clicked around me, cold and impersonal. And then came the news that no one ever expects to hear. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, progressive, irreversible. The words hung in the sterile air of the examination room, a grim sentence disguised in clinical language. I sat there, nodding politely as the doctor explained treatment options and lifestyle changes. But inside, my heart was sinking. Not for myself. I had lived a full life, rich with joy and sorrow and everything in between. But for Ethan, for Andrew, they had just begun to heal. Would they now have to bear the burden of watching me fade? I kept the news to myself at first. I wanted to savor the sweetness of our new lives for a little longer. The family dinners, the lazy Sunday mornings, the simple pleasures we had fought so hard to reclaim. But secrets, I had learned, are a heavy load, and carrying them alone only makes the journey harder. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat Andrew down at the kitchen table, the same place where so many of our family's battles had begun and ended. I told him everything. He sat in stunned silence, his hands balled into fists on the table. "Mom," he choked out. "Number no, we just got you back." I reached out, placing my hand over his. "You're not losing me, Andrew," I said gently. "Not yet, and when the time comes, you'll have Ethan. You'll have the strength we built together." Tears slid down his cheeks unchecked. "We'll fight it," he whispered fiercely. "We'll fight it every step of the way." And we did. We adapted. Oxygen tanks became part of the living room landscape. Inhalers and medications lined the shelves once reserved for cookbooks. Andrew installed handrails in the bathroom and a chairlift on the stairs. Margaret dropped by weekly with groceries and gossip, her visits as vital to my spirit as the medicines were to my body. And Ethan, sweet, thoughtful Ethan, became my little guardian. He carried my tote bag when we went to the farmer's market. He fetched my tea when my hands trembled too badly to carry the cup. He insisted on reading to me every night, his small voice stumbling over big words with fierce determination. "Don't worry, Grandma," he said one evening, tucking the blanket around my legs. "I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. I'm going to make you all better." I smiled, my heart aching with love and pride. "You already make me better, sweetheart," I whispered, "every single day." There were bad days, of course. Days when breathing felt like trying to pull air through a straw. Days when the pain was sharp and sudden and cruel. Days when despair curled around me like smoke. But there were good days, too. Sunlit mornings spent baking with Ethan, flour dusting the air like snow. Afternoons in the garden, the scent of earth and tomatoes rich in the heat. Evenings on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching the stars blink into existence. We filled our days with as much life as we could cram into them, because that is what you do when you understand, truly understand, that every moment is precious. You live. The holidays came and went, each one sweeter and more poignant than the last. Birthdays were celebrated with laughter and cake and too many candles. Anniversaries of battles fought and won were marked with quiet gratitude. Life was not perfect, but it was beautiful, and in the end, that was enough. More than enough. Spring arrived in San Francisco like a whispered promise. The fog that had blanketed the city for months lifted, revealing blue skies so vivid they seemed almost unreal. The cherry trees lining our street burst into bloom, their pale pink petals fluttering down like confetti whenever the breeze stirred. It was during this season of renewal, of fragile, stubborn hope, that I realized my time was growing short. Not in the melodramatic way I had once feared, no sudden collapse, no sharp decline, but in a slow, undeniable fading, like the last embers of a once roaring fire. The house was too quiet during the day now. Andrew was working again, having found a position that allowed him to work remotely several days a week, keeping a careful eye on me without hovering. Ethan was thriving at school, his afternoons filled with soccer practice and science fairs and the delightful, messy chaos of childhood. They were living, exactly as I had hoped they would, and it was time for me to prepare for the next part of the journey. One sunny afternoon, while Ethan was at school and Andrew was tapping away at his laptop upstairs, I sat at the old oak desk in my bedroom and began to write. It was not a will. The formal documents had long since been handled by Deborah, tucked safely away in the filing cabinet. This was something different, something more personal, a letter, a message to Ethan, to be given to him when he was old enough to truly understand. I wrote slowly, carefully, savoring the weight of the pen in my hand, the familiar scratch of ink against paper. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, it means I have already left this world, but not your heart. Know this, my darling boy, you were, and always will be, the brightest light in my life. Your laughter healed wounds I thought would never mend. Your hugs stitched together pieces of my broken spirit. Your love reminded me, again and again, that hope is never foolish. Life will not always be easy. There will be days when the world feels heavy, when people disappoint you, when you question your own strength. But remember, you come from a long line of fighters. You carry within you the resilience of your grandmother, who loved you beyond all reason and beyond all fear. Be kind, be brave, hold tight to your dreams, even when they seem distant. Forgive when you can, fight when you must, and always, always choose love over bitterness. I am so proud of you, Ethan, more than words can ever say. I will be with you in every sunset, in every song, in every quiet moment when you close your eyes and feel the strength of the ones who came before you. You are my greatest legacy. With all the love this heart could hold, Grandma Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it into an envelope. On the front, I wrote simply, "For Ethan, when he is ready." I placed it in the top drawer of my bedside table, beneath the photo of us taken last summer, Ethan perched on my lap, both of us grinning, our faces smudged with blueberry pie. It was enough. The final months were a gift. I moved more slowly, I tired more easily, but every moment shimmered with meaning. Afternoons on the porch, listening to Ethan chatter about his day. Evenings, curled up on the couch, watching old black and white movies with Andrew. Mornings spent savoring the first sip of tea, the sunlight pooling on the kitchen floor like spilled gold. Life became a series of small miracles. The night I knew it was time, there was no fear, only peace. I tucked Ethan into bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, marveling as always at the miracle of him. "I love you, Grandma," he mumbled sleepily. "I love you too, my sweet boy," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Always." I sat on the porch for a while after that, wrapped in my old shawl, watching the stars prick the dark velvet sky. I thought of my husband, gone too soon but never far from my heart. I thought of the battles fought and the battles won. I thought of the love that had carried me, stubborn and fierce, through every storm, and when I finally closed my eyes, It was not an ending, it was a homecoming. The house mourned me quietly. Neighbors left flowers on the porch. Margaret organized a small service at the community center, filled with simple songs and heartfelt stories. Deborah stood up and spoke about dignity, about strength, about the quiet power of a life lived with love at its center. Andrew held Ethan's hand tightly throughout the ceremony, his other hand resting on the worn, leather-bound photo album I had left behind. And when it came time to say goodbye, it was not with bitterness, it was with gratitude. Ethan opened the letter a few years later, on the eve of his high school graduation. By then, he was taller than Andrew, with my husband's stubborn chin and my own quiet fire in his eyes. He read the letter in his room, sunlight streaming through the window, dust motes dancing in the golden air. When he came downstairs, the letter trembling in his hand, he didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around Andrew and held on tight, and through the open window, on the breeze that smelled of summer and growing things, I was there, always. Final thoughts. To you listening, I say this: life will bruise you, it will break you, it will demand everything you have and then ask for more. But if you choose love, stubborn, reckless, determined love, you will build something that even time cannot erode. You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you believe. You are worthy of a life that fills your heart instead of hollowing it out. Thank you for walking this road with me. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. Share your memories, your battles, your victories. And if you believe in the quiet power of choosing love, please like this video and subscribe for more stories from the heart. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories are not the ones we are given. They are the ones we write for ourselves.